But first tonight, it's day 4 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've seen devastating scenes and we've watched in horror as babies have been evacuated, newborn tiny babies evacuated to bunkers, and as Russian civilian tanks have been running over, gunning down civilian vehicles. Russian tanks gunning down civilian vehicles. This shows how Western leaders, from Joe Biden to Boris Johnson, underestimated Putin's ambition, brutality, and humanity, naively underestimated him and his capacity for cruelty. And now there's war, and we can only watch on in horror. The reality is that there was no genuine, real attempt to stop Russia invading Ukraine. No attempt. The only action Biden and the West took was economic sanctions. We were told they were going to deter Putin. But the US president has now finally admitted that that was never going to be the case. They were never going to stop Putin, and Biden knew it. Have a look.
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening.
So this is Biden admitting that he didn't do anything to stop Putin in his tracks. I've been saying on this show, and I've been interviewing experts for weeks now, who have said that economic sanctions were not going to be enough to deter Putin. And what a surprise, they weren't. This is the responsibility of Europe, of NATO, and of the US, of course, but it's always been America that shows global leadership, that puts the fear of God into our enemies, that keeps tyrants and dictators in check. The US has vacated that space. Not only has Biden not sent any substantial arsenal of weaponry to Ukraine to allow it to defend itself, but he even ruled out military intervention well in advance. This was basically laying out the red carpet for Putin to invade Russia. It was giving Putin the heads up that no one was going to stop him, no one was going to send in the troops. We have seen, and the world has watched, as we have seen a do-nothing approach from Biden. And you'd have to say that he is one of the weakest, limpest American presidents in history. How can we expect Putin to be scared of predictable Biden and Kamala Harris, a bloke with dementia who fumbles his words and a joke of a deputy? They do not present a picture of powerful leadership. Now, our new host here at Sky News, Piers Morgan, made this point excellently in his column this weekend. He wrote this: President Biden is showing about as much will to square up to Putin as a timid tadpole confronted by a great white shark. He said this is hardly surprising given his cowardly overnight desertion of the Afghan people last summer, which continues to cause abject misery and despair. And Piers Morgan writes that this sent Putin the firm message that America no longer had the stomach for a fight. In the clearest admission that Biden's sanctions-only approach was wrong and was not strong enough is the fact that we're now seeing Western allies start to talk, too late and too slow, about sending in more weapons to help Ukraine. Today, Prime Minister Scott Morrison changed his tune to say that Australia would consider sending what he called lethal aid. This term refers to military aid designed to kill people. In other words, deadly weapons.
Russia must pay a heavy price. They must pay a heavy price. And we will continue to add to that price as we consider every single option that is in front of us. I've taken nothing off the table. I've just spoken with the Defence Minister and we'll be seeking to provide whatever support we can for lethal aid through our NATO partners, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, and we'll be working through those channels because that's the most effective way to do it.
But beefing up weapons to send to Ukraine now could very easily be too little too late. It's something the US should have prepared for months ago. This should have happened a long time ago, knowing this invasion was on the cards. And Ukraine has been pleading for tank missiles and other equipment. If we weren't going to send troops, if we didn't want to risk young lives, then we should have at least helped Ukraine properly arm itself, properly defend itself. And when you look at it, there couldn't be a greater contrast between Biden, too afraid to fight, who decided on a sanctions-only policy and doesn't seem to be changing his position, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is taking to the streets to defend his country and his people. This extraordinary video shows Zelensky defying the US offer to evacuate to safety. Instead, he said he needs anti-tank ammunition and not a ride.
We will not lay down the weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. And the truth is that this is our land, our country, our children.
Zelensky is a 44-year-old Jewish man. He was a comedian and actor before he turned to politics. He's a hero, brave, strong, showing true leadership, and it has been unbelievable to watch, incredible to watch. And all of this while he knows that he's at the top of Putin's kill list. As retired British Army Colonel Richard Kemp wrote, if Russia captured and killed Zelensky, this could pave the way for an interim regime. That's why he's such a big target for Putin. But here's why this entire invasion, this entire war matters to us in Australia. This isn't just about Ukraine, although what's unfolding there is clearly devastating and horrific and inhumane. But it's not just about Ukraine. This is about our global security. If Putin is successful in Ukraine, then what will he set his sights on next? And if we didn't step in to stop the Ukraine invasion, then why would we do so on the next occasion or the one after that, as Putin fulfills his dream of rebuilding the Soviet empire? And we know that our enemies in China and Iran and other places are watching closely as Putin, with little resistance from the West, has started his invasion of Ukraine. And you may not like this, but it's no coincidence that this is occurring under Biden's leadership and not Trump's. Donald Trump gave a speech today at the conservative CPAC conference, and he highlighted the Biden administration's clear failure on foreign policy.
Joe Biden has turned calm into chaos, competence into incompetence. You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history and put them together, and they would not have done the damage that Joe Biden and his administration has done in just a very short 13 months.
Now, in Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison's position is that we can't go to war in every country on earth. Now, this may be true and may be logical, but we have to acknowledge that there is a lot more at stake right now, given the alliance between Russia and China. This invasion does pose a threat to our security in our region and to the West. The lack of meaningful help for Ukraine is sending the wrong message, a dangerous message, to evil dictators. As I said before, that American leadership has vacated the space. If Ukraine seems a very long way from here in Australia, well, China's tentacles aren't. This is just as much about our security in our region as it is in Europe. And it's really important for us in the weeks ahead to look at the role that China has played in this. As I said last week, it is likely that Xi Jinping asked Putin to hold off any invasion until after the Beijing Olympics. And as Morrison pointed out, while the rest of the world was imposing sanctions on Russia, China was helping Moscow out. Xi Jinping refused to call it an invasion. He blamed the US for being the culprit of the current tension, of the current war. And he then lifted wheat import restrictions, boosting Russia's economy.
I particularly have been concerned at the lack of a strong response from China. Overnight, it was uploaded, the report is in the South China Morning Post today, at a time when the world was seeking to put additional sanctions on Russia. They have eased restrictions on trade of Russian wheat into China. So at a time when Australia, together with the United Kingdom, together with the United States and Europe and Japan, are acting to cut off Russia, the Chinese government is following through on easing trade restrictions with Russia. And that is simply unacceptable.
The weak United States leadership we've seen is only matched by an even weaker, by a broken United Nations. The UN Security Council tried to pass a resolution condemning the war and calling for Russian troops to withdraw, but it was vetoed by Russia. Another member state, China, abstained from the vote, as did India and the United Arab Emirates. This is a joke of a body. It's the very reason it even came into existence, the United Nations, is to try and prevent war. If it can't even pass a resolution calling for war to stop, then it is worthless and should be disbanded if it isn't reformed immediately in a meaningful way.